Hello and welcome everyone to this session on day 4 of the Wellbeing Economy Week. I'm actually really looking forward to this discussion, and I'm very grateful to our speakers, Selvin, KWONG and Angela Dennis, for proposing that we have this discussion about universal basic income and job guarantee. First, I'd like to acknowledge country. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders of the New Economy Network Australia, and I am privileged to live, work and play on Yagara Turrbal lands here in North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and as always acknowledge the remarkable governance and civilizational culture that cared for country across many hundreds of nations across the continent now known as Australia. I also like to personally acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonisation and the fact that the First Nations peoples of this continent have never ceded their lands. The work that NENA and other organisations that I'm involved with get up to is very much involved in the decolonisation of our hearts, minds and practices to try to restore justice to First Nations peoples, and also play an important role in trying to find ways to live ethically and sustainably here in this beautiful continent. So today's session is very exciting. I'm excited. The wonderful Selvin, KWONG and Angela Dennis, who will introduce themselves as they see fit in a moment, are going to give, I guess you would call it a mini debate about the benefits and otherwise of universal basic income and job guarantee. The format this morning will be 15 minutes from each person as a sort of an overview of their arguments, and then some time for each of them to respond to each other. And then for anyone in our audience who's keen to be involved in the discussion, what we'd like is a mini citizens assembly where you get to share your view. And then we'll have a poll at the end, if technology is kind to me today, which it often isn't, just to capture what you're thinking and what you'd like to see developed further. So without further ado from me, I'm going to hand over to our two lovely guest speakers. I'm here if you need me. But otherwise, over to you.
Okay, so I'll start. I'm Selvin. I'm a community worker and researcher from Brisbane, and my areas of interest and experience are around financial inclusion, welfare reform, labour rights and women's equity. So I'll start with providing a brief explanation of what a job guarantee is, as I'm going to be arguing for this scheme. So to quote Bill Mitchell, a job guarantee is an unconditional job offer to anyone who wants to work at a socially inclusive minimum wage. It provides a buffer stock of jobs that would expand and contract with the private sector activity. So when the private sector is strong, the job guarantee scheme would be small, and when it is weak, it would expand to make sure that people didn't go into unemployment with work up to the hours of their choosing. So in this way, it provides economic security to those who may be left out of the labour force through market forces that are no fault of their own. And currently, the national minimum wage is $772.60 per week for a 38-hour week. So there are three main points that I'd like to make to demonstrate the merits of the job guarantee. Firstly, from a rights-based perspective, from the right to work perspective, and secondly, by applying some analysis to questioning the need for unemployment and its impact on individuals and society. Thirdly, to highlight the macroeconomic benefits and potentials of this scheme. So to kick off, I would see that the job guarantee would be the scheme that best delivers on the right to work, which is the idea that people have a human right to work, to engage in productive employment, to have the opportunity to gain a living by work, which they freely choose or accept. So it's thinking about the right to work as fundamental to the dignity of the individual, as enshrined in Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, which Australia is signatory. So there is a long tradition to the right to work movement internationally and within Australia and Queensland, in fact, that is unfortunately not more renowned. The right to work was once a key demand of the labour movement, alongside the right to collective bargaining over wages and conditions and the 8-hour day. So on the international front, we had the 1848 French national workshops, the Trafalgar Square riots by the unemployed in 1886, the 1707 Right to Work Bill by James Kilhardy. So back at home in Queensland, my home state, in 1919, the Queensland Unemployed Workers Bill was tabled by Premier Ted Theodore, who led the abolition of the upper house in Queensland. And this actually prompted massive employer opposition, which Victor Kirk argues led to a 4-year financial blockade against Queensland by London financiers. But none of these efforts were successful until in 1945, when the Curtin government released its white paper on full employment in Australia, declaring that it would be the responsibility of the Commonwealth government to ensure decent work is available to those who want it. So for about 30 years, successive Labor and Liberal governments maintained this policy to deliberately keep the rate of unemployment below 2%. And after the war, the public sector was a major employer. They trained more graduates and novices than they needed. And the public sector supplied skilled workers to the private sector. And this policy was successfully maintained by successive governments, but abandoned in the 1970s. So the question is, what happened? And this takes me to my next point, being highlighting the unethical and questionable macroeconomic policies that became popularized in the 1970s, championed by neoliberal economists who argued that in order to keep a check on inflation, you need to keep a certain number of people unemployed. So this is known as NAIRU, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, commonly known to be 5% unemployment, or now 4.5%. And it has been used as a deliberate policy tool to control inflation and as an argument against Keynesian demand management in favor of free markets. So it is said that when unemployment is below NAIRU, the wage growth and inflation tends to rise over time, and that this is a problem. So as a union, having worked as a union researcher for 5 years, it's clear that this is obviously a strategy to undermine the bargaining power of workers. Or to quote one argument in the post-war days, keeping a quarter million or so out of work to keep the fear of the sack in the hearts of all the rest. I just want to point out the detrimental effects of orientating economic policies around such a figure, in thinking about the individuals that are left behind and their dependents and families, in considering the cost of unemployment. We know that long-term unemployment has one of the worst impacts on the well-being of an individual and families in terms of physical and mental health, increased rates of suicide, crime, substance abuse, as well as social isolation and intergenerational poverty. There's a deterioration of productive capacity, reduced skill formation, a loss of human resources that results in labor underutilization. So there are both significant individual and social economic costs that I argue are too high and unethical to bear. And if full employment was successfully implemented in the post-war years, we have to question why it has not been maintained and how legitimate Nauru, this 5% is, as a way of controlling inflation, or is it a political tool for the suppression of wages? So my final point is to highlight some of the benefits of this scheme in terms of its sophistication as a macroeconomic policy and as a counterpart to monetary theory, which we won't have time to go into today. So the job guarantee is a labor market stabilization system that is responsive to the supply and demands of the market. It can expand and contract the pool of JG workers as required. It addresses the issue of labor utilization in times of market failure. It addresses inflation. It contributes to skill formation. So it creates a bridge between matching workers to jobs in the private sector when this labor market brokerage is usually very difficult. It uses public sector employment and expenditure to supplement and fuel private sector demand for labor. And there's a general lack of entry-level jobs, as employers are reluctant to train someone and risk losing them. So when you have a skill, when the public sector trains someone, it actually supplies this demand. So also the policy potentials in addressing the plethora of socio-economic issues of our times, in supplying human resources to where it is not profitable, or where the public sector may not be well established. It can provide solutions to transitional economies and in regional areas where people can then remain in their communities to build new skills or infrastructure that are needed locally. It can offer solutions to the lack of public housing in harnessing workers in this way, such as in the post-war years. It's a flexible scheme that can be accommodated to tailor to the individual depending on their special needs or preferences. So the first step would be to expand our current public service, and it can only be like a marginal job guarantee program to start. And without going into too much detail, Victor Quirk has written a paper on the job guarantee in practice to create a draft demonstration model in detailing some necessary and optional features of the scheme. And in it, he points out some of the implementation issues, how a job guarantee could be structured and administered in central and regional offices, the role of the public employment service or local government in creating jobs, and the operations of it by social enterprises. And it could be run in different divisions such as environmental services, human services, public works, remote regional cultural services, and there'd be some communication or consultation processes in there. So I would really encourage you to read up about that. But in summary, there are some strong arguments in favor of the job guarantee, as I had outlined, from a right to work perspective. Secondly, in questioning whether Nauru as the 5% unemployment figure is necessary or an ethical tool for controlling inflation. And thirdly, highlighting the macroeconomic sophistication of this responsive and innovative scheme with its many benefits and potential in solving current problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Selvin. Over to you, Angela, to briefly introduce yourself and give your thoughts. Thank you.
Hello. I hope everyone can hear me because it's sort of broken up a little bit a couple times.
You seem fine at the moment.
Okay. All right, great.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Angela. I have a long-standing interest in welfare issues. I've written on various economic topics, and I worked in a think tank. I'm really interested in how we can improve our welfare system for the betterment of all individuals and for human flourishing generally. So a basic income, an idea that's had a resurgence in the past few years. I'm sure many of you will have heard of it. The definition of a basic income, there's a variety of definitions, but the Basic Income Earth Network describes it as follows. A basic income, also known as a citizen's dividend, is an income unconditionally granted to all on an individual basis, without means test or work requirement. So crucially, it's paid to individuals rather than households. It's paid irrespective of any income from other sources, and it's paid without requiring the performance of any work or the willingness to accept a job if offered. And crucially, although there's some debate amongst basic income circles about this, most advocates argue that it should be sufficient. That means it should cover the basic costs of living, accommodation, food, etc. So whilst the idea sounds shockingly radical to our current way of thinking about entitlements, it's actually been around for a long time, and it's been advocated by people on both the left and the right for various reasons. In fact, one of the earliest modern scholars to advocate the idea was philosopher Bertrand Russell. And he argued, when education is finished, no one should be compelled to work. And those who choose not to work should receive a base livelihood and be left completely free. So let's take a step back from this vision of the future, potential future, and look at what we've currently got, because we can't really judge or assess any plan for the future unless we get a real clear idea of what's wrong with our current system. Otherwise, we risk repeating the mistakes of the present. So we have a patchwork of benefits which relate to people with different circumstances and different times of life. Different criteria are required. So for example, we have benefits for people who are unemployed. We have benefits for people who are disabled, who have experienced injury. We have benefits for people who are older, who are retired. We have housing benefits, we have family benefits. And each benefit has different hoops that you have to go through to get it, different requirements, and different constraints. And the experiences which people have with our current system can be quite negative. I'd like to read you some quotes from people that have had experiences with our current social security system. Here is Wendy. She's 58. She has 2 science degrees and a forklift license, and she unfortunately lost her job in her 50s. And this is what she said. They started shunting me into jobs for which I was unsuited. They made me take cleaning jobs, even though I had arthritis. Once, a caseworker asked me whether I had any retail experience. In 40 years, I'd not worked a day in retail, but she said she'd found the job for me in retail. She even bought me interview clothes that didn't fit. You're treated like a child by a child in an infinite loop, constantly afraid they'll cut off your payments again and you'll fall behind on your bills. So that was her experience. Another gentleman who had been on unemployment benefits says, the last time I was cut off, I was sent to do work for the dole at a place ironically called People Who Care. We were doing busy work. It was terribly run. Twice they lost my paperwork. And here is an account of a mother whose child has a developmental disability. She says, every time Centrelink makes us jump through the hoops for our son, who has a developmental delay, I tell them I'd like nothing more than to reply, he's cured of his genetic disability. We don't need or want your money anymore. So people having all sorts of unfortunate, humiliating, time-wasting, money-wasting experiences with our current system. And I'd summarize them as follows. We have non-take-up of benefit from those who are entitled to it, just because it's too confusing or it's a waste of time or people feel embarrassed to make use of the current social security system. We have a terrible cultural stigma associated with our current system. We're all familiar with the dole bludger image, the layabout. People feel embarrassed and stigmatized. And also because of the kinds of requirements which can be quite demeaning, such as filling in a job diary or taking any job, even if it's totally unsuitable for you. Another one is the benefit trap. This is a huge problem with our current system. The benefit trap is the situation whereby you're receiving a benefit, but you'd like to take up work. But as soon as you start receiving any income from work, your benefit intake tapers off so quickly that it becomes completely ineffective. Your income is equaled by the money lost in your benefit tapering off. And for many people, especially parents, this is particularly difficult because once they start working, they have to pay for childcare. So this trap keeps people stuck on benefits and not be able to take up any kind of work that's available. Another huge issue with our current system, administrative delays and assessment mistakes causing hardship. We're all probably familiar with the robo-debt sort of news that occurred a few years back, a terrible situation where people were sent these debts, and of course they had no idea whether they had a debt or not because of the complexity of the system. There are delays in getting onto benefit. You might have a change in circumstances and all of a sudden you've either accrued a debt or you've been knocked off your benefit and you might not even know. This is the fragility of the current system and the risk it poses that it can plunge people into destitution, it seems like on a whim, due to some administrative error or change in circumstances. And another major problem with the current situation or the current system is that the help provided is not the help needed. As the accounts we saw before describe, we have people going to make work jobs which don't help them at all. People going to resume writing workshops when they've already got a resume or being given interview clothing that doesn't fit. This is not the help they need, but when they try to get the help they need, it's not available. So with these criticisms of our current situation in mind, I'd like us to set up some ambitious criteria for a future welfare state, a well-being welfare state. And I'm going to argue that it's basic income that best meets these criteria. But these are criteria that I'd like you to use to assess basic income, to assess job guarantee, to assess any policy that professes to be a positive future for Australians. So the first criteria for my well-being welfare state, if you like, is flexibility. The welfare system that we currently have was created in a time when it was thought that people would have a job for a long time or for life. But that's not the case anymore. People change jobs, people swap in and out of jobs and businesses and self-employment, and they can even drop in and out of jobs many times in a year. So any kind of process that requires time-consuming sign-up, document sending in, et cetera, just doesn't work for the current flexible workplace and the work life. But basic income does. Basic income doesn't go anywhere. Basic income is always there. You don't have to reapply. You don't have to submit medical forms. You don't have to submit income forms or bank statements. It's there. Second point, our future well-being, welfare should be stable. No risks of being knocked off because, I don't know, your grandmother sent you some money and now your circumstances have changed. These are anxiety inducing and unfair, and they place people at a real disadvantage. Basic income, you know how much you're getting. You've got an income floor. It's not going anywhere. There's nobody who can rip it out from under you because some change in circumstances has occurred. The next criteria is really important, and for me personally, it's one of the most compelling. Basic income or any future welfare system should be enabling. By that I mean it should enable and empower people towards finding their own way, towards what they want to do. Now, ineffectual fortnightly appointments, compulsory work programs, education, resume writing sessions, this is something that's imposed from above. The goal should be to assist people to find work which is fulfilling and enjoyable for them, rather than taking any job for fear of benefit sanction. And basic income provides that. It gives you that freedom. You know that your basics are provided. You can find your own way towards what suits you. The next criteria is balance. Okay, balance, by which I mean work-life balance. Okay, the welfare system as it is at the moment still has the norm or the standard of full-time unemployment. For many people, this is not feasible. Whether it be for health reasons or personal reasons or caring responsibilities. There's this expectation that the norm should be full-time work. For example, you're expected to look for full-time work when you're on unemployment benefit, and you're expected to spend your full-time hours looking for work. But why? Why not? We know the importance of balance for people's health and well-being. Basic income does foster this because, again, you know that you have that income floor. So you can take on a few hours of work if that's all you can handle. You can balance it with your family responsibilities. The next criteria for a future well-being welfare economy should be non-stigmatizing. Now, what causes stigma? Well, programs which are universal tend not to be stigmatizing. So that is, programs which everybody participates in tend not to accrue the kind of stigma that something like the dole has. Think, for example, of the Medicare card. There's not a lot of stigma associated with using your Medicare card because everybody has one. But something like the dole, there's ways of stigmatizing that group because it's means tested and because they have to do demeaning activities such as filling in job diaries and telling people where they were at on the weekend and that kind of thing. Basic income is free of all that. It's completely universal. Everybody gets it. It won't accrue that kind of stigma. The next criteria is simple. Simple. The welfare system should be as simple as possible and avoid excessive and unnecessary bureaucracy. Okay? Complexity creates confusion about entitlements, which can then lead to costly sanctioning and causes people to miss out on their entitlements. It also creates a power differential whereby the person seeking to get the entitlement is sort of at a disadvantage when compared to the person in the office who knows everything about it. It's very difficult to really get clear information about what you're entitled to when you have to read pages of legislation to really find out what it is. That's not the way it should be. It should be simple, much like, a basic income. You get a certain amount and that is the rate. Everybody gets it. There's no confusion. It should be incentivizing. Okay, it should avoid creating the benefit trap, which I talked about earlier. And basic income clearly meets this criteria because as you earn a bit of income, say you've got your basic income, but you want to go and get some work, you're not going to start losing your basic income. It's a real floor, and anything you earn will be on top of that. It should be modern. Our welfare system of the future should be modern. There's no point looking back to things that work from the past but don't fit our modern world. So making use of the internet, making use of the way people contact each other today, I think this fits well with the UBI and its flexibility. And the final criteria, which again I want to stress is important, is the sufficiency. Now there are some basic income policies which don't argue for a sufficient income, that is covering all of a person's basic needs, but I'd argue that we should aim for a basic income that is truly sufficient. This is what's needed to really give people the freedom to find work which suits them. So basic income meets my criteria for a future wellbeing welfare service, for an idealistic one. But you might still be doubting and thinking, yeah, but could this actually work in practice? Well, of course, no country, no nation has yet instituted a UBI in full, a universal basic income. But there are trials, there have been trials, and I can send you a link to a whole page of interesting trials that give us an idea of how this might work. For example, in Manitoba, Canada in the 70s, a program was run that provided a source of income for a group of people. And the findings were revealing. Compared with a control group, those receiving the income experienced a reduction in hospitalization, especially for accident, injury, and mental illness. Contact with physicians, doctors regarding mental illness also reduced. And a greater proportion of students stayed in school to grade 12. And so researchers concluded that this program may improve health and social outcomes at the community level. I'd also like to tell you about the Alaska Permanent Fund. Now in Alaska, they have great oil wealth, and what they've done is they've put some of that wealth aside into a fund. And every year, every Alaskan receives a dividend out from that fund. That fund, the existence of that fund has been credited with reducing inequality in Alaska, such that it's now the second least unequal country. So it's the second most equal state, in the United States of America. And the Alaska Permanent Fund is attributed with that success. And the final trial or example I'd like to talk about is that which was held in Madhya Pradesh in India. Every adult was given a sum of money and every child was given half of that amount. And the findings were extremely positive. How did people use this money? They used it to improve their housing. They used it to improve their latrines and to protect themselves against malaria. There was a significant improvement in the average weight for age among children. People had better diets because they started eating better quality food, and school attendance improved. Also, people were very likely to reduce their debts and make small-scale investments, such as planting improved grain, repairs to equipment, and the creation of shops. And it had a particularly positive effect for disadvantaged groups, such as women, the disabled, and the lower caste families. There have been a whole lot of other trials that have occurred too, and many of them have had extremely positive results for a basic income. So I've set out a criteria there for an idealistic, ambitious future welfare system, which I hope will support a modern Australia in which we believe in people's ability to flourish and we want them to flourish. And I hope that you agree that basic income is the policy which best meets that criteria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. We'll now come back to Selvin to respond to Angela, and then Angela will respond to Selvin. And then because we're a manageable sized group, we'll open it up for comments. So if anyone would like to share their views by unmuting when we let you know, that would be great. Okay, so Selvin, back to you.
you, Angela. So I have some ad hoc comments in response to your presentation. So I think on the question of stigma, I would not think that the job guarantee creates necessarily more stigma than the universal basic income scheme, if that's the income that a person was solely on. So that addresses that one. On the question of simplicity, I find that the universal basic income argument is often seen as a very straightforward policy to implement. So it's very persuasive, but sometimes, complex problems cannot be solved with simple solutions. So I would urge, listeners to be quite cautious about, that as being, the magic bullet. And on the question of sufficiency, I would actually think that the universal basic income is more likely to be a basic amount compared to, and not as high as the job guarantee amount. So that's another question to think about. I think you talked a bit about administrative errors, and in terms of the job guarantee, I feel like probably there wouldn't be much more administrative error to running the job guarantee than there would be to running a payroll. So I believe that there would be, in the current welfare system, there is a lot of clunky asset and means testing. So the job guarantee also addresses that. And I think job guarantee also addresses the question of transitional jobs where people are not staying in jobs for life, because there is a job guaranteed for you by the government if you so choose to take it, and that's the whole point. In terms of stability, I think the job guarantee provides that stability and security, so you don't have to be worried about your employer sacking you, because you always have that job guarantee job to go to if needed. In terms of enabling, I do believe that the job guarantee fills that criteria because it leads to skills formation. So I think it does harness the potential of the individual from that perspective. And incentivizing, and the question that you raised about the benefits trap, that's actually an argument for the job guarantee, in my opinion, because the issue with the job guarantee is that it comes with a kind of moral hazard. So it's basically an income for doing nothing, if I'm being very blunt, whereas the job guarantee is a participatory income in exchange for contributing one's time to the public purpose. And I don't think that anyone would argue that it's necessarily moral for a healthy person to be conditioned to expect the community to support them without any means of reciprocity, except for those people who are unable to work, or they would still be the other benefits, for people who are disabled, elderly, carers, etc., etc. It's not the job guarantee is not a replacement for those people, despite the fact that it can offer some flexibility to tailoring job guarantee roles to those people, if they so choose to take it. So the critical question that I feel like I need to raise in response is that only the job guarantee addresses the power relations between workers and employers. So the job guarantee makes firms compete for workers, not workers for jobs. The basic income does not address market failures. There would still be a lot of precarious work, casual work, underemployment. In fact, the basic income might make things even worse. if you're running with the Milton Friedman scenario. So yeah, I think those are a few points that I'd like to raise. And there are some examples about successful job guarantee models that's been run in the past. So in India, the Indian government has employed millions of workers and created productive jobs and plugged people into local infrastructure, development projects, building drains, roads, footpaths, and that's actually kept a lid on urban migration from people flooding into cities in search of work. They can remain in their local communities. And there's also examples from South Africa where, building basic infrastructure and amenities for impoverished communities, etc. So yeah, I'll leave it there and open up for audience input or your feedback, Angela.
My turn, Selvin.
Angela, yeah, if you'd like to respond and keep it to 5 minutes max, then we'll still have 10 or 15 minutes for discussion. And I think it's such an important issue. We'll definitely be opening this up for a bigger debate next year. So any participants, please don't feel that it's a small amount of time. Think of it as kicking things off. Thank you, Angela.
Thanks, Selvin. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so interesting. Well, I'd like us to have a think about the quality of this job that's being proposed with the job guarantee. So we have this workforce that expands and contracts, and it's just anyone who's unemployed at that time goes into these jobs. So really, what's the quality of these jobs actually going to be? Because it can't be anything requiring very specific skills or training. And it has to be the kind of thing that can sort of take people on a dime, very quickly, and let go of them very quickly, and have a constantly moving, changing workforce. So really, I'd like to think, what will the quality of these jobs be? And my concern is that it really will be indistinguishable from a work for the dole scheme. The kind of humiliating, busy work that that people have been required to do to get benefits, which doesn't help them get into the workforce, the rest of the workforce, doesn't really help them do anything outside of working in a sort of work for the dole situation. So yeah, it's just really not feasible that any highly technical or skilled job would require this kind of employee pool. Also, it's not a real job because there's no progression. I mean, the features of a job in the workforce, they just can't apply to this kind of a job. You can't progress, you can't unionize to get any kind of improvement in salary, because your salary is just your benefits. Calling it a job is really almost like a misnomer. And I question whether there'll be significant skills formation with this kind of, as I say, job. The question of power relations, whether it tackles employee-employee power relations, that's an interesting one. I mean, what you're proposing is a low-waged pool of workers that employers can draw on. I could see that causing conflict with other workers. It's threatening to those workers, is it not? Because they could be replaced by this low-waged pool of workers. And I think in America, where this has occurred, there has been some strife arising in this kind of way. Also, I'd like to point out that the UBI in this respect actually really helps low-income workers. Why? Because the worst jobs, the jobs that nobody wants to do, the toilet cleaning job in a hotel or whatever, those jobs, the people who do them, they do them because they don't have any alternative, because they're, they would be destitute otherwise, for example. The basic income gives them an alternative. They can say no to to a salary that's too low, that's not worth their while. And as a result, basic income would lead to some of these, most unpleasant jobs, more unpleasant jobs, having to ask or having to offer a higher salary to get people to do them. And I think that's right. It's right that those kind of jobs should pay better. And UBI would facilitate that. I'd like to say something about this this moral hazard. There's such a puritanical note there, this idea that to kind of get anything in the society, we have to work. And the implication there is that work is good, inherently good, and that all jobs are good, that a job is always better than no job, which I totally reject. I totally reject. That work is somehow the only entitlement to receive. No. We're in an economy now whereby a lot of the capital gains come from, the efforts of all of us. Yanis Varoufakis is a Greek economist who's written interestingly about this. He talks about Google, for example. Now, the wealth of Google, the capital wealth of Google, comes largely from the work, so to speak, that we all do in participating with it. And he suggests that a basic income could be funded by taking some percentage of capital wealth and putting it in a fund and distributing it. Likewise, there's land rents. Land rents, of course, are increase in the value of land due to the efforts of the community, due to everybody in making a place desirable to live in. The value of the land goes up. So that's again something that could be. You could have a land value tax could contribute to a basic income. None of these require us to work. And I think that the Alaska Permanent Fund is an excellent example. That's oil wealth. That's the civic wealth of Alaskans, and everybody gets a share in it. And I'd like to say, especially on the side of that idea, that people in Alaska, when they receive this dividend, there's a strong feeling of pride and connectivity and sort of civic pride with other Alaskans. They don't work for that wealth. It's part of the wealth of the nation that everybody shares in. And I think it would be great if we could have UBI as having a similar spirit. Thanks.
Thank you so much. This has been excellent. Really enjoyed hearing both sides of your arguments as they are. Perhaps we could open up now to our group of folks joining us today. I note that John August is writing a lot of comments, and John has been involved in a lot of advocacy for different responses. John, would you like to respond? And let's keep it to say 2 minutes, if that's okay, so that everyone's got a chance to share. And if anyone else would like to speak, please just raise your hand electronically or in the real world. Or otherwise, I'll read some of the comments too. So, John, what do you think of UBI versus job guarantee, or both?
Well, broadly speaking, I prefer UBI to job guarantee. Between myself and the Pirate Party, our vision is for individual empowerment. So that means supporting cottage industry. So the idea that we should only have the government or business providing employment, the idea of enabling people to develop themselves as individuals, I suppose that's something that we emphasise. And, we see universal basic income as doing that. And our own version incorporates a negative income tax. So it's better described as a guaranteed minimum income rather than the use of the universal basic income. But certainly, if you don't make any money by other means, you still get that. And every little bit of money you make means there's actually more money in your hand at the end of the day. So it's incremental. It's incentivizing, to use that ugly word. I acknowledge that there's going to be an incline. So as soon as you get a job, you have the expenses of having a job, transport, and so on and so on. Okay, so there's going to be a bit of a dip, but it's not the same poverty trap as you have at the moment, or the same disincentive to work as you have at the moment. But the other thing that we've also said about UBI is you do want to have volunteer bureaus to let people do stuff. And also you might have private enterprise loaning people on a sort of an Arab basis, you know, venture capital to let people, you know, put on plays or develop themselves if they want to become plumbers or whatever. Because sure, you can mow lawns at the local field, but what if you want to become a plumber and you have to have the skills and the tools to do that? And, you know, UBI gives you a bit of an option to put away a nest egg to develop yourself in that way. Anyway, 2 minutes. I hope I haven't gone over.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And I noticed, is Gary still on or has he left? Gary Flomenhoft had joined us, but I think he's jumped off. He's actually made a note here. Selvin, the Nauru is a fraud based on the Phillips curve, which is completely proven false. And he's put a little link in there. So I don't know, I can barely understand what some of these concepts are. So if you want to have a little read of that or think about that, you're very welcome to. I'm just checking if anyone else has their hand up. No, no one wants to speak, but there are a few questions and comments. Denise, I think your question, are there current examples of job guarantee? Where and how is it going? I think Angela and Selvin have touched on some of the examples, but did either one of you like to elaborate on that, actual specific examples? Selvin, oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Dom.
Yeah, I think I provided a couple of examples, but from India and South Africa, but I think like I'm happy for to be contacted directly for more information about that sort of scheme. I've just posted a comment on there regarding the Centre for Employment and Equity, known as COFFEE. So they're a bit of a research think tank centre based on the University of Newcastle, and they've been pioneering a lot of the research on job guarantee and modern monetary theory, in fact. So yeah, happy to provide any references or more information regarding anything from this presentation today, if they contact.
Thank you, Selvin. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Selvin. Michelle made a comment earlier saying, regarding UBI, a much less, perhaps more likely reform could be, instead of paying everyone, we pay only the poor, with the only condition being their level of income. Thoughts? I think we've already touched on this in terms of the stigma, the unfairness, and the lack of opportunities, but please, Selvin or Angela, do you want to talk about the arguments for why this would be for everyone? Just touch on that universal argument again, just briefly.
Yeah. No, interesting. So, well, one of the reasons for it to be universal, I mentioned the stigma associated with benefits that only accrue to part of the population. Another reason is to do with the cost savings from all of the administration. So there's a huge amount of administration that goes on right now to means test everyone, to check everyone's bank details, to process everyone, etc. All of that cost, that expense can be done away with if your policy is universal. It goes to everyone. Some people feel concerned that rich people might, would now be getting, money. But the tax system can deal with that part of it. I think, sorry, what was you suggested that perhaps only the poor could, the poor could get it with the condition. So my issue with that would be, well, it maintains the whole assessment system and all of the attendant expenses and labor that goes into that right now. So it doesn't really change any of that. And it doesn't change the stigmatizing condition of the current system.
Thank you, Angela. And also I'm a complete advocate for anything that might free human potential to be creative and explore and do the things that they feel is their personal purpose to do. And as someone who's built NENA and Ayla whilst not being paid to do it and scrounging for an income around the edges to sustain me and my life and my family, to do things that I feel are important that are not happening in society, I'm a real advocate for, if you free a lot of people's potential, they'll do amazing things. They might slob around for a few months and chill out, but most people get bored and then start looking for the thing they really want to do. So I've personally, as someone who's been building NENA and so passionate about anything like the UBI or job guarantee that can help people do that. If there aren't any other burning questions, one thing I'd love for both of you to do, Angela and Selvin, is what would the world look like if we had a bit of both? Can you say a few things about that? And then we might aim to wrap up at 1:15. Could we have both? Could we have a mix of creative ways to free human potential and support them? I mean, sure, the answer is probably yes, but how might we do that?
You want me to go first, Selvin? Okay. Okay, I guess, yeah. You know, that I remember reading once someone saying that people will have to be educated for leisure. And by leisure, they didn't mean, you know, watching TV. They meant leisure as defined as pursuing activity that's innately meaningful. Because in a way, we've been socialized to think we have to toil and then, you know, basically relax because we're so spent from the toil. So, yeah, I think there would be a huge adjustment if people sort of just had maybe a basic income, and then for some people anyway, they might feel at a loss. So I do think there's room for a basic income, and then sort of skills programs that have been mentioned, that is, you know, facilitate people into certain, either courses or training programs that are optional, crucially optional. And I suppose one of my fears is that, you know, that some government down the track would decide to make it not optional anymore. But I could see a nice marriage between a UBI and an optional flexible skills building program. Yeah. You're still on mute.
On mute, Selvin.
Yes, yeah, that's a really interesting point. So I guess like there's a question about how either scheme can begin. So actually the monetary theory in terms of funding can be actually used to fund either schemes. The question we're debating today is like which scheme is superior to the other, or potentially a mix of both. So in terms of making a start, what would that look like? So maybe you might have a pilot scheme for both running concurrently. I agree with Angela in terms of the job guarantee, in terms of flexibility in providing skills building. As I'd mentioned before, there is some room to move in terms of how you structure a job guarantee, how it can be tailored to the individual. The current intent, like according to some of the practical detailing that Victor Quirk had done, is that it would be run by local councils or social enterprises, but then in regional areas, like would that look a bit different? And for people with special needs or preferences, can they come up with their own idea of what they think is like a job? So for example, in the area of cultural services, perhaps if you're an artist, this is my job, this is actually a really valid, this is value that I'm adding to the community in my own unique way. So can a job guarantee job be structured, or a position description be created to legitimize that as as a role that would be a job guarantee job, and possibly higher than the basic income. So I think, yeah, there's definitely potential to meet in the middle, and I'd love to see that conversation grow outside of this forum on how that marriage can potentially happen.
Thank you so much. Look, we're out of time for now, but I want to thank you so much for really this very thoughtful and careful preparation of the pros and cons and possibilities of these schemes. I'd like to wrap up our session now. There's been a couple of extra points in the chat. I do urge anyone who's in the audience interested to actually copy some of those resources that Angela and Selvin have provided. But Angela and Selvin are not going to get away with it too easily, because I'm going to grab them for something next year, something longer, perhaps even a bigger debate with a number of additional people who've been connected to NENA, looking at UBI for some time. So I want to really thank you, lovely ladies, for your incredible work and for provoking some very thoughtful discussions. And I look forward to having you back again within the NENA family next year for some other big discussions and connecting that to strategies. So on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you all. And I'd like to thank our participants. Please stay in touch with these issues through the UBI Hub. We may have to rename it to something more universal. But other than that, we'll sign it off now. And just a little reminder, the next session in Wellbeing Economy Week is at 1 p.m, where myself and several other wonderful human beings are talking about donor economics, the Green Prince approach, the relationist ethos, and how we rethink our cities. So thank you again very much, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you at another session soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies.